So I'm Lacey Wootton, and I'm the director of the Writing Studies program over at CAS. This is brand new, as of July 1st. And this is Shinko, who is in SIS, and we're going to introduce ourselves a little bit more in terms of grading in just a moment. But we have two images of responding to student writing here. There's this one, which is, I kind of think of as October, right there. And then there's this one, which is something I've certainly never been able to achieve. We don't want you, obviously, we don't want you to be here. We're not going to get you here, right? Because that's obviously not good in terms of effective grading either. To kind of tell you where we're starting off from, we're just going to each take a couple minutes and talk a little bit about our own personal take on responding to student writing. Then we're going to do a little bit of discussion. We're going to give you some information interspersed with a bit of discussion. And in the last part of this session, we're going to have you all thinking about how you might start to generate a rubric for an assignment you have in mind or something that you've used before. So hopefully you'll come away with some ideas you can use this fall. So Rose, you want to talk a little bit about your take on responding to student writing?
Yes, good morning. I think the announcement is set to go out momentarily this morning, but I will be named the Assistant Dean for Undergrad Education in the School of International Service. Just my supporters, I think. Thank you. But at any rate, I oversee the first year seminars in SIS as part of our undergraduate curriculum. My normal day job is undergraduate program director. Then last year I stepped in to serve as acting associate dean for curriculum and learning when Patrick Jackson was on sabbatical. So now this year I'm back to one job. So what I want to do is share with you some attitudes that I have developed. I've taught at every single level of education. I started at 4th grade. And I have worked my way up to teaching PhD classes at the University of Connecticut. I'm an IR theorist, so I teach very abstract. I'm a post-structural theorist. I teach very abstract types of courses in political theory and political thought. And I have taught at all levels. I've taught AP extensively at the secondary level, so I know exactly where these students are coming from. I know about the structure of the DBQ and how awful it is for real engaging creative thinking that is critical. So that's the context for me in terms of my background. When I approach writing in a class, I don't think of it as just tacking on assignments so that I have metrics for grading. It is much more integrative. How and where and why am I going to actually foster the writing process as part and parcel of an integrated curriculum? So I scaffold all of my writing assignments from very basic all the way up to anticipating what the final writing project should look like. And those are constructed very deliberately. I also make sure that in the course of teaching content, I use writing strategies as a way to teach content. Most people think, oh, I can't waste time doing that. I need to be lecturing and covering content. Well, actually, you can encourage students to think about the content in much more productive, deeper, critical ways by breaking up the writing process and threading it through your content when you meet the students in class. For instance, in my 200-level gateway, identity, race, gender, culture, and this will be my last comment, I have a series of readings they do on Native American identity. And they watch a couple of videos, they watch a really terrible Dave Chappelle comedy routine. And then when they come to class, I break them into small groups and I say to them, okay, here's what I want you to do. In your group, I want you to develop some type of a thesis statement based upon the materials you prepared for class that then you would be prepared to write about. So then in the course of that class, if they're engaging and talking about the material, they're flipping through things, they're looking at notes, they bring up the video again on their laptop. And then what we do is I ask, okay, let's go through the thesis statements that you've come up with. I write it on the board, then we ask for feedback. What further clarification might you need for this thesis statement? What questions arise in your mind? So we do that, and then I go back to the students and I say, okay, now I want you to develop 4 or 5 bullet points that you would then develop to build out your argument, so that they again get an opportunity to talk about the proof and supporting things they would draw from the materials. And then that shifts into our broader discussion for the day. This is not a class with 11 kids or 19 kids. I'm talking 35 students. And I organize almost every class around some type of a experiential, what am I actually going to do with this stuff that was assigned? And to integrate writing and critical reading so that they are integrated throughout and threaded throughout the class. You can't write well unless you learn how to read well. And you can't write and read well unless you learn how to speak well and to defend arguments in class. So I will stop there.
So I want to first underscore one of the things that Rose said in describing that assignment that I think is important to keep in mind as we talk today, which is writing does not have to mean a 10-page essay or a 5-page essay or even a 3-page essay. Writing can be wrestling with a thesis statement, wrestling with an argument. It can be quick notes at the start of a discussion to think, to kind of work out your ideas. So I want us just to begin to kind of open up that definition of writing in terms of what we're talking about here. Very quickly, just to kind of introduce my perspective here. So I have way too many hats right now. Rose is like shrinking hers to one. I'm just expanding mine. So I've been teaching here at AU in the Writing Studies program for 19 years now, and I worked as a middle school and high school English teacher for 10 years before that.
That's why we get along.
Yes, that's right. We have that background of having survived teaching middle school. It was like a club.
Teenagers.
So I have the teaching role, which I'm still doing, and I've taken on directing the program. I also am chairing the committee to develop the new W2 courses through the AU Core. And so I have a really strong interest in writing across the curriculum, writing in the disciplines because of that. And then the last hat is I'm actually working on getting my PhD in writing and rhetoric out at George Mason University. And so all of those things, when I think about responding to student writing, all of those things are coming into my head all at once, which kind of squares you up a little bit in terms of you think you know what you're doing, and all of a sudden it turns out that you don't. And so I think that that's realistic for responding to student writing, because when I think about it as intricately entwined with everything else that we do. Writing is communication, and if students are simply writing into the void, and by the void I mean getting it some check marks in the margin and then a grade at the end, that's not communication, that's not authentic, that's not real writing, right? It's going through the motions, and of course they're not going to do a good job then. So it's intertwined with thinking, it's intertwined with my relationship with the students, it's intertwined with their learning and my teaching in every way. And all the research into writing reinforces this idea that all writing is contextual. Even if the context is not fully authentic, because we're dealing with undergraduate education, many of us, it is still a context, nonetheless, and that matters. And so that idea of the contextual nature of writing and of responding, I think is something to keep in mind. The more that we can pull that relationship back into a human relationship and a communicative relationship and a teaching and learning relationship, the more successful we're going to be in terms of responding to student writing. So we're not going to try to make responding more complicated for you, but I want to complicate your understanding of it in a bigger picture, but we're going to try to simplify some of the actual actions for you, if that makes sense. A little bit of a tension there. So let's start with a little bit of discussion, some of your ideas. And originally, when we were working on this, I actually only had the first question on there. What makes responding to student writing so daunting? And I think that first picture I showed you is one of the reasons it is, right? Because you get, for me, if I have 3 classes, I get close to 60 papers that are there stacked up in front of me in my living room. But then I thought about it afterward, and now I really need to also ask, what are the benefits and rewards of responding to student writing? Because it is not all bleak by any means. So we'd like to hear from you for a couple of minutes. What makes it difficult and what makes it rewarding? What do you all think? Yeah.
I was an English teacher. I had a question, but I wanted to respond to that. I feel like I want to provide, so I had 150 students, so I would have
I remember those
papers,
days, yes.
five periods of like
Right.
30 students. And it was daunting because I wanted to give them feedback that would move them forward, and providing substantial feedback on 150 papers was very daunting. I wanted to ask you, because now I'm in higher ed, I used to use revision stations, and that helped kind of break down so it wasn't so daunting. So if the students were struggling with their claim, we used the Toolman model. So if they were struggling with their claim, I would put them in one group. If their evidence was weak, I put them in another group. If their warrant was weak, I put them in a third group. And if their clarification was weak. So the revision stations helped me a lot because they were able to improve in groups, and I would go from group to group. But for higher ed, do you think the revision stations would be beneficial, or to high school?
No. I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
We're going to talk, in fact, in a few minutes about things you can do to help to have students do some of this work for you.
Okay. But it was daunting having so many papers and being able to provide an appropriate amount of feedback.
And so one thing we have to recognize as part of this that I think you're bringing up here is time is a reality. You know, you can't get rid of it. There's only so much time, and we have other lives and other work to do. And responding to student writing takes time. Yeah. Yes.
One thing I find daunting is to be consistent across the papers when I am rewarding creativity. So they will write a 5-page paper, probably in October, to come up with creative responses to a deep-seated conflict in the world of their choosing. And then later in the semester, they'll revisit that same conflict and go deeper on what strategies, policies, recommendations they would make to resolve a deep-rooted conflict. But they're rewarded for creativity, and I find that I'm not always consistent. How do you be rigorous and consistent across? In my case, I have 70 in 2 gateway classes.
Yeah.
And there, I think, is what you really need to do. The American College AACU has rubrics for almost everything you could ever want. And there are varieties of those rubrics for writing. And so you can look at some of those and you can pull out the pieces that directly relate to creativity, and you keep that. I brought the one for our FYS that we use. But you keep that rubric next to you as you're grading, and that will help you as long as you're clear in your mind what creativity means in this context. It really hinges on you having a roadmap before you sit down to grade. You know, reviewing what were the directions you gave them, reviewing your rubric, and having both of those with you to make sure, and sometimes spot read random papers just to get a sense of what's going on in the class before you even start to grade. You can just skim them quickly so that they're lining up with your kind of fundamental expectation.
But realistically, there's an element of subjectivity, and there always will be. There just is. Again, that's the context, right? And it's human communication. And if a student gives a paper to me, and I'm going to read it one way, and they can give the same paper to any of you, and you are going to read it differently and probably evaluate it differently from me. You know, and students don't like that, but there it is. That's reality.
It's not that they don't like it. That's fine. I don't think they are convinced by that. I don't think we can convince them.
That's probably true.
And they don't like that.
Mhm.
You can see that in the evaluation. If you say that it's impossible for you to not be subjective, they believe that it's your personal problem.
I think that's very true. Yes.
Yeah.
And here's the thing that we run into in writing studies is because we are writing teachers, our job is to give very detailed feedback. Grades tend to be fairly low. in the college writing classes. It's quite rare for me to have more than 1 or 2 A minuses in a class of 19 as the highest grade. That's really rare. They'll often turn in that paper somewhere else, you know, similar work to someone else in the university and be getting an A quite easily on it. They don't like me for that. Again, that's going to happen.
One thing I'm very challenged by is students whose English is not their first language, international students are just, I want to have the same bar for everyone. It's not fair if I'm grading people differently, but obviously some people have so many more challenges and just, you know, and some people, and you can speak so well, but then when, you know, so you're surprised by the student, but you know, you don't want to really ding them for a lot of just grammar mistakes that, you know, in their own language they would have really had down pat.
Right, and this is a hard question, right? And it's one we're going to increasingly confront. We actually have Lauren Sinclair is here, who is with the Accelerator program, and you all are doing a session later today, right? You know, I'm such a grammar stickler, and I'm really picky about it. It matters to me a lot. I have increasingly, for my international students, not let go everything, but let go the things that I know are characteristics of the language difference. Like if I have a Chinese student, articles. They're never going to get those right in my class. They never will. And if I mark, and so this is sort of a bigger picture lesson. They will never get them right. I can mark them and mark them and mark them all day, and they will never get them right. So why am I doing it?
Well, I mean, it seems like if it's something so specific, you know, because I'll see a, you know, verb, you know, tense that, you know, someone gets consistently wrong. Can't that be learned? I mean, if it's something so
some of those things, you know, it's funny. I mean, Lauren, obviously, you guys, I'm sure you're talking more about this, but some of these things like articles, there's something like so intrinsic to the language about it that if you think about how you would try to explain that to somebody who had no idea what you were talking about, it's actually not that simple. But no, one would
if
think
they learn anything else, it just seems
that's
like
right. That's right. And so think about. So I guess the larger picture is think about what really matters to you. What, and this is something we'll talk a little bit more about later. What matters most to you in your evaluation in that assignment?
And triage it, really.
Right.
That's what you're doing.
Yeah. Do articles matter most to you, or does the thesis and the argument and the support matter most to you? What matters most? That doesn't mean ignore everything else, but set your priorities. You'll drive yourself crazy otherwise. Yeah. And
As a former international student here in I think I can speak for a lot of the others who are also still here. I appreciated every single correction my professors made to my papers because it improved me as a writer. And nobody's going to be upset. If anything, they'll be thankful that you take the time. And even if it doesn't go into the actual evaluation of the grade, it's instrumental for their academic careers.
And the other thing is we have to keep in mind, writing is uneven, it develops in uneven ways, it's not linear. And so, you know, the work you're putting in, at some point, it's going to click. You may not be the beneficiary of that, but your student will be down the road. So I think we also, as Lacey and I spoke about in the beginning, we have to adjust our own context for writing. And I think we need to be honest about how we learn to write and the mistakes we made as students and when the light bulbs went on for us. And, you know, myself included, you know, in master's and PhD programs, a lot of times that was toward the end of the semester. I'm like, oh, I get it now. You know, so it wasn't at the beginning and it wasn't that the professor wasn't giving me feedback. I just didn't put it together. So I think we need to think about it much more unevenly across the spectrum. They're going to get some things right and improve, other things not so much. So don't think of it like this. It is not that.
And to kind of underscore that, one of the parting gifts we have for you over here is a little book on responding to student writing, and it comes out of a longitudinal study that was done at Harvard University. And one of the things they found was that what students learned in their first year writing class often didn't truly kick in until they were juniors or seniors. So things that, you know, so that this has been very comforting to me actually over the years. Things that I'm teaching them, and students will come back to me and say, I hated this Harris, this book called Rewriting. I hated this book, but now I'm working on my capstone and I understand exactly what he was talking about. So that's the other thing too. It says don't ignore it, but expect that they may not learn it all immediately.
You're paying it forward, is really what you're doing.
Right, that's right. Lauren, you had your hand up, and then we'll get maybe one more comment after that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was, well, we will talk a little bit at our 3:30 session about what errors are embedded and what sort of changes over time you might expect from students when they start out if you're interested about English language learning and second language acquisition. But one of my concerns with writing is that when we're teaching students how to write, we're teaching a certain convention, and sometimes I end up getting a stack of papers that all sound exactly the same, like, and I worry that I'm creating clones, and I know that all of our performances in these spaces are somewhat geared towards that, and we need it to an extent to be comprehensible, but I worry that students lose their originality or their own voice, and then for me, when I'm grading papers, I get bored because I'm like, it's not that they aren't violating academic integrity, but I know that they're telling me what they think I want to hear because they want a grade. They're so grade conscious. So I get a stack of papers and they're all saying the right things in the right ways, but it lacks any depth. So I'm missing that piece, and I want to still be encouraging them without, having them worry that they aren't doing it right or they won't get the grade that they want.
I think that something that's kind of behind what you're saying is one of the big parts about responding to student writing is how you craft your writing assignments. That's a big, that's where it starts, right? My response, my evaluation of student writing starts when I hand them that assignment. And we work towards it. And so they're all bound up together. Brad and I were talking earlier about professional development stuff we should do around writing this coming year, and I think assignment design actually is one that would be really useful, right? Because yeah, why make your life more miserable? If this is hard anyways, why assign them stuff that you're going to be bored reading?
And let me just piggyback on that too. You start messaging the students from day one in the way you are responding to the comments they're making in class, that you are valuing creativity, and that they don't have to all approach things from the similar way. That thesis statement writing workshop, the kids love it. And what I show in that exercise is there isn't a formulaic thesis statement. I take them where they are, and the goal is to let them participate in helping each of the groups improve their statement. So I don't want a cookie cutter thesis statement, which is really in many cases what I was teaching at the AP level with DBQs. And they've got to look the same. They basically do look the same. There's nothing creative about them. So you really have to, Lacey's right, it's not only the assignment, it's the whole context and how you are encouraging and rewarding and supporting creative, innovative engagement on the part of the students from the very first time you open your mouth. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And encouraging them to take the risks. And they need to feel that you're supporting them to take risks.
And to argue against too much standardization, a lot of my research recently has been in writing across the curriculum. And we may say, if we brought together people from each different discipline or around the university and we all use the phrase thesis statement, we all actually would be looking for something somewhat different. And when we all say, we want evidence, we all want something different. Or we say a logically organized paper, we all want something different. There is no standardized form of academic writing. So again, keep that in mind in terms of your response. You may want something for this class, but this is not making or breaking their entire academic career if they adhere to exactly what you want in there, because somebody else is going to want something different, inevitably. Let's take one more comment for now, and then we'll have more discussion at the end. You had your hand up back there?
Oh, thank you.
Then we'll move on.
Yes, I've been teaching here for a while, and I teach all introductory classes. And can you just let us know from the writing program, so not all the first year students do not necessarily have college writing first semester.
No, they do.
They do. They all have it.
Yeah, so very, very quickly, the way it works for the writing courses, most students take Writing 100 and Writing 101. So fall and spring, they take it, most of them, almost all of them take it in their first year. If a student gets a particular score on the AP test or the IB test, then they take writing 106, which is a 1-semester intensive course. But every
And
student,
most of them can get that first semester?
no,
Okay.
no, those are split about half and half.
Okay, but
For
the
106.
other ones should all be in a writing class their
Yes,
very
and
first semester?
everybody should have it their first year. Yes. So I want to leave time for discussion at the end, so if you had a question or a comment, hold on to it, so that we can come back around.
And we've got to come back to benefits and rewards. 'cause
Yes,
there's
well,
a
there
lot
weren't any,
there.
which is telling.
Yes.
So I wanted to start with just some, I think, mistakes and misconceptions that I've noticed in working with faculty with writing. First, not having a plan for your response, just kind of going in, launching into that stack of papers without knowing how you're going to respond to it and kind of blindly marking stuff up, you know, like right and left, and then all of a sudden 5 hours have gone by and you've gone through 3 papers.
Yeah.
Right, you need a plan. That's the way to be efficient. Conflating formative and summative response. Formative is when it's in process, when it's not finished yet. Summative is when you're giving it a grade. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about that. Not having your priorities in order. Not knowing what you value most, because that's what you're gonna give most of your time to in that response. Trying to respond to too much, which kind of goes along with that. You can't teach everything in every assignment. You can only teach some stuff, because students only will learn something. And then not responding to enough. Doing that, I'm guessing that most of the people in this room, because I think I'm probably preaching to the choir to a certain degree here. I imagine most of you in this room are not going through student papers and putting a couple check marks in the margin and then slapping a grade at the end and calling it a day. You want to give more feedback than that. Correcting or editing, just marking sentence level errors instead of actually responding as a reader and just being punitive and trying to figure out what's wrong with the paper. And then those things are really useful. And then as we started out talking about, and that Rose talked a lot about, assuming that writing and grading exist in a vacuum. That this is a discrete assignment that somehow functions as a separate piece from everything else you do in the class. That isn't attached to anything else. When in fact it all is attached to everything else, as Rose said. So we're going to go into a little more detail on these suggestions for how to address some of these things. So let me just go into, instead of reading through that, let's talk about the particulars. So first of all, you want to think about going, even before that you get those papers, when you design your assignment sheet or your prompt, make your expectations and priorities clear there. Students are efficient. They're in fact increasingly efficient, I think, over time.
And strategic.
And strategic.
Very strategic.
Right. And if you say, if the very first thing on your assignment sheet is 5 to 7 pages, Chicago-style documentation, you will fail if you write any run-on sentences. What are students going to spend the most time on? Getting into 5 to 7 pages, making sure the documentation is that style, and looking for run-ons. That's where their time and effort is going to go there, right? So you want to communicate your priorities. So what do you want the students to learn in this assignment in terms of their writing? And that's one of the things we're going to talk about at the end when I have you think about an assignment of your own. Each assignment doesn't have to teach everything. This is a lesson I have to remind myself every time I do a writing assignment. Maybe I really want them to focus on argument and thesis and support. Maybe I really want them to focus on a more sophisticated form of organization. Maybe I really want them to be much more intellectually creative. And I might have 2 or 3 things in there, but I wouldn't have necessarily all of those in there, all at once. And Rose, you talked about this at the beginning, that assignments are scaffolded, there's a progression of skills. So I'm going to emphasize, if I give 3 assignments, I'm going to emphasize different things in each of those and try to have them build and articulate over the course of the semester. So then you want to think about how are they going to demonstrate what they learned through their writing, whether it's content, as Rose said, those come together, right? A way of thinking. Is it a writing skill? Can you provide them with any models of what you want? I use models, and especially in my graduate work, you know, I'm writing in genres I've never written in before. I copy people, right? We all do when we write in a new genre.
And let me just, every
yeah.
class, I usually will ask them, in some point in the introduction of the class, which assigned reading did you like and why? And it's much more about them thinking about the way the author presented the argument and which one didn't you like and why. And they're pretty astute in figuring out why one article was more accessible to them. And when they can start identifying why writing, even as a reader, was more accessible to them, that's that self-reflexive process that if you continue to develop that in them, they'll start to pay attention to it and start watching how the various authors they're reading construct an argument. And that's very helpful for them as well to it's like the artists, right? The kids who study art that go to the art galleries and sit in front of the paintings copying. That's what Lacey's talking about. You're asking them which piece of writing really got to you and why. And they'll figure out how their mind works, how they organize information, and why one author is more accessible to them than another. And then it could just be that the piece was badly written too, and we assigned it anyways.
But that's a different discussion.
That's a different
Yeah,
discussion.
right. So you do all this work up front, right? You put in all this effort into a good, thorough assignment sheet that you've really thought about what you want and organized it so your priorities are clear. Then, here's the nice thing. You do all that work up front. When you go to respond to the student writing, you can just I copy and paste from the criteria on my assignment sheet, and I convert that into a rubric. In other words, I've already pretty much written my rubric when I write the assignment sheet. And one of the handouts I have for you up here is 2 different response sheets that I give students, and the language is pulled directly from my assignment sheet. So it's more effort up front, but then it saves you time when you figure out how you're going to respond to those papers. And for the person who asked about being consistent across Barbie asked about being consistent across papers, that helps keep you honest, too. The other issue is, another issue is separating formative and summative response. So you all, those of you who are not teaching writing classes, probably don't have a lot of time to respond to drafts at all. You don't have to respond to a whole draft. Just like a piece of writing is not just, is not writing a 10-page paper, there's many more versions of writing than that. You could collect an introductory paragraph from students, and you could give that feedback. You could collect their thesis statement, and you could give that feedback. You could collect their conclusions. That would be actually interesting, their exercise, their concluding paragraphs, or an outline. You can look at stuff in class. So you can give progress feedback. But the question I want to open up for a minute and have you think about is, so what's the difference in the response? If you're responding to either a whole draft or a component or whatever, a smaller piece, versus when you are sitting down to grade, what changes in your response? How do you respond differently in those 2 situations? What do you think?
Did you raise your hand? Were you raising your hand?
No.
Oh, she was counting people. Yeah.
Sorry.
I think at the draft there's a lot of potential that you're hoping that the connectivity is going to happen, and the evidence is going to build to support it. And at the final draft, at the final document, you're like, ready to go. Where you're hoping it's there.
Yeah, there's that sense of the potential that you're responding to potential. There's a really nice way of putting it, I think. Yeah. What else?
Since I work a lot with English language learners in the drafting stage, what is a really efficient way of using the feedback is just highlighting different colors for different issues, grammatical issues, or issues of comprehensibility, and then having some sort of code where I can refer students. Usually I use the drafting stage for initial feedback and then a requirement to go visit the writing center or a writing tutor to go work on those issues or to gather feedback from a peer review session.
So you can point students out to go do things, right? You're directing them to do stuff in that formative stage. Some other differences between the 2. This is a hard question if you haven't often commented on drafts very much, I know. Yeah.
as I thought of this in my head, I think I'm really doing it wrong, so. But I feel like when I'm commenting on work in progress, it's all about how to get it better and ideas and do this. And when I am grading, I feel that I'm trying to justify the grade that I gave.
Right.
That I, I don't want someone to say, hey, why didn't I get an A? And I'm saying all the reasons, what was great about it, why what you did well, but also why you didn't get a better grade.
I'm so glad you said that, because we can say we want our feedback to teach students and move them forward, right? Nonetheless, when you are giving summative feedback, it needs to justify the grade too. That's I think inevitable, isn't it? And it's only fair to students. They should know why they got the grade they got. I don't think we should apologize.
Yeah, but I guess the reason I was second guessing it is what you said before about, it not being punitive, and we're not giving reasons, like you start there, but then, you're getting worse and worse and worse. We're not, it shouldn't, that makes it sound more punitive, but I guess.
No, that's true.
Equal also about what they did well in it, but when you're grading a lot at a time, and when you're justifying, you do focus on the negative.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really important, to validate that they do have good ideas. And if they would have pushed this a little bit further, or explained this a little bit more, or made more definitive connections, whatever it is in that kernel or gem, so that even if, the student is getting a C, and you've really, that's what I mean by providing that support network under them, so that you're giving them the spaces forward. This was really good, and this is one way you could have developed this, not this is the way. But here's one thing you could have done. You could have reordered this. This point would have been so much stronger here. So you're always trying to correct or, do it in a very gentle way. And I think that's one of the most rewarding things, because they do get it. And they will come back to you and they will say, I know I struggled with my writing, but you really did help me. Or you really did try to help me, or I wasn't able to kind of pull it all together at this point yet. But I have genuinely found that they do come back if you, always give them the offering in what you're finding where the paper came up short.
And I think no matter what, and I think responding as a reader makes it less punitive too. And I think you all know this, right? You use I statements, not you statements. I got lost at this part of the paper, not your organization isn't working. The more you can respond as a reader, I think makes it less punitive. You'll see on one of the handouts that we have for you, I have an example of formative response, an example of summative response. And on the summative one, I do bullet points for them. And one of the things I have on there is what worked well, what didn't work as well, and what to keep working on in the future. And I just have bullets for each of those. So I try to keep them looking forward, even if it's a summative response.
And as Lacey said, it's so important for them to sum up at the end of the paper, even just short things. And I think, to your point about seeing the potential, there are times when I'm reading their papers and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is such a great idea here. And I just let them know it and say, oh, I was really excited by what this could open up onto. But I think here's where it didn't kind of live up to its full potential in your idea, and then give them some suggestions. So at the end, what you've already illustrated were your 3 things that you were looking for. If you can sum that up at the end, and I mean really quickly, then the students know there's a coherent logic to the way my professor is evaluating this assignment. And they know you're not just, whatever, throwing them up in the air and assigning a grade. Because you literally said, okay, this was good, this needs improvement, and, you kind of give them the 3 points or 4 points.
No matter what, let's face it, we all know this as human beings. It always, even if we're being criticized, it's still within that can feel good to know that somebody's really taken the time to pay attention to our ideas.
Very mature.
Well, I know, even since I'm being graded now too as a student, I also have to remind myself of that. Oh, this is a good thing.
If you take them seriously, they will take you seriously.
I think that's true.
What were the 3 you said? What went well?
What went well, what didn't work as well, and what to work on in the future. And it's on, actually, on one of the handouts that's on there.
Okay.
Yeah, Brett.
Building like from what Rose was saying and informative feedback, I struggle with the line of wanting to give them to say like this was like you could open this up and not wanting to say here's how you should open it up.
Yes, right.
But then if I haven't given examples, then they're like, but why? Where am I going with this? But if I do give the examples, I find they just use
Mm-hmm.
like they go exactly there, and it's like what Lauren was saying. They're like, oh, that's what you want then.
Mhm.
It's like no, that's not what I want. I'm just trying to give you a sense of.
Give them a couple very quickly. Don't get down into the micro level details. This argument could have gone here or could have gone here, depending upon what they drew on in that paragraph or paragraphs. And so you can show them that there, there's more than one direction, even just in a brief comment.
But here's one of the pitfalls, right, of formative feedback, when students read it as, if I do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to get an A.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? And that problem is there. I cultivate constructive vagueness, I hope, in my comments. For that reason. Yeah.
So I don't teach writing. I teach schools and in the education. So what I do is I have the students like 2 weeks before a paper is due, I let them know they can submit a draft to me if they want feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So it's only open, it's optional based on, so the students have to make that decision, but
And
they
they
also
have
have
to
to do the
early.
paper
Yes.
early.
Yes.
So, and I thought about what you said, the students who submitted like for feedback, I call it feed forward to make it better, but I do think sometimes that those students think if I submit it early, I'll get an A on the final draft. But I didn't know if I should maybe change it and have every person in the class submit a portion like you were saying earlier.
I think experiment. That's one of the best lessons I got years ago when I got my teaching credential was every time you walk into a classroom, it's an experiment. And if it doesn't work, do something different next time.
That's right.
If it
Yeah,
works,
just,
we're gonna move on.
try it out.
Yeah. That served me well over years of things not always going well. Let's get one more comment back here.
It's sort of a comment and a question. One thing I've tried, and I'm curious what you think about this as writing people. I thought about formative feedback as sort of the first paper, like the whole thing is formative for the whole class, and I've done verbal feedback, right? I don't actually write anything on the paper, but you couldn't do this in a huge class, but for my first year seminars, they're small, 19 students, I had them each come to my office hours and we talk about their paper, and I just ask questions. I'm curious why, you started here, or what was your thinking here, but I wonder what you think about that, right? It doesn't get onto the paper, so we're more just sort of discussing the ideas.
Right.
But I don't know if you feel like that's effective.
How do you feel that it works?
Does it work?
I mean, do the
I feel like
students
it works
implement
at building relationships with students, which
Okay.
is one of my goals.
Right.
It opens them up to trying new things, and I think it helps us treat each other in a respectful way and look at writing as a process. So those are all of my goals.
That all
but
sounds, if that's what you're going for, then it's working.
It is, but I'm not sure that it's working in terms of them able to translate the conversation to an actual piece of writing.
Right. Well, you could make them write something down at the end of your conversation with them and say, what are your three takeaways from this meeting, and what are you going to try to put into practice with the next writing? Because I'm much closer to you, Amanda. I don't do like the pre-drafts or things, but my assignments are structured so that they basically are circular. And it's basically the same assignment over the course of the semester, but the complexity of it changes, the nature of the readings change, the assignment changes, but it's basically the same thing. So they're just keep practicing it over and over again. So I think if you ask them what the takeaway is and have them write that down, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's smart because, we all know you walk out of that room and it'd be out of my head, just like that. So, Betsy, you get a last
I was just
comment.
gonna say, I think it's a great idea. And I would allow them and encourage them to record it. They all have their phones, so that they can go back and listen, which I guess will actually generate more questions. They're gonna come back and say, wait a minute, I wasn't clear here, this is what or what were you saying here? So it even further develops the idea of your goals, which is writing as a process of developing relationships.
I piggyback on that. I teach grad courses and not academic, use academic writing where you can work professional writing, but even that could model good networking behavior. If you had them email you after and say, I enjoyed meeting with you so much, this is what I got out of our conversation. And then you can also see it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't mean for them to get right. Like, that's exactly what I wasn't trying to do.
Well, notice what you're doing there. Now they're doing more writing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's all writing. Yeah. Good. So think about this. What I think we want to leave you with on this is thinking about our different occasions for feedback. Not every, again, just like not every writing assignment has to teach every skill, not every occasion for feedback has to do everything either. It's targeted, it's purposeful, you want to be very intentional and deliberate and know what your priorities are for each of those occasions.
And it also makes it more interesting for them, right? If you keep slightly switching it up, that it's not always the same, and that you use different strategies throughout and over the course of the semester for encouraging, engagement verbally as well as, kind of the written part of it, and always getting them to make summative statements about what they read, to make synthetic, to synthesize information, and really getting them to practice that verbally constantly. And then it becomes so much easier for them to do it when they write because they've been speaking it. Now, they may not write it in the exactly grammatical, we may still have problems with the grammar, but they may be hitting more at that ability to synthesize and then analyze by encouraging them to do it verbally consistently.
We've talked a little bit already, you brought up your idea about revision stations. You don't have to do all of this yourself. You can get their classmates to help with giving feedback on student paper. So think about how students can participate in responding to their peers' writing. Now, the comments I often hear from faculty about this is, well, they give terrible feedback to each other. And sometimes they do, you're right. I think it still can be a learning experience. But kind of consistent with everything else we've been saying here, draft review does not have to be students responding to full drafts in detail every time. Students, I've had colleagues, for example, have had students take their thesis statements and put them up on the wall, and students walk around the room and write comments underneath. I've done a thing where I have students make an outline of their paper, sometimes a reverse outline, where they've outlined what they've written, cut it up into slips of paper, mix them all up, and then have a partner figure out the best organization of it. That's feedback right there. I've had students read their topic sentences to each other aloud to try to hear a train of thought. That's feedback. It takes 10 minutes to do it. So again, we're talking, one of our themes here is break it down, take discrete parts, do something that takes 10 minutes. And then often, the more you can target student feedback to each other, the more effective their feedback is going to be. If people in this room are talking about, I don't know how to respond to a full paper, I don't know if I'm doing it right, then how can we ask students to do that?
And I think too, if you really think about writing, I always use the metaphor in my class of using those brightly colored Duplo blocks that kids play with. And think about how you can have a bucket of those and you can organize all those different colors and shapes into a different thing. And so when they think about ideas and they think about organization, so metaphorically this idea of building and using things. And so the more we really drill down into the building blocks of writing, and we integrate those building blocks strategically throughout the course of the semester, we will be pedagogically helping students develop their writing. And you don't start at the end. You don't start with the dissertation. You start with all those little micro facets of writing and think for yourself what they are and how you can integrate them across the semester. But I always tell them when you get to my writing assignment and you've got all these things I've assigned you, videos and plays and academic writing and a novel, and then how do you develop a thesis statement out of that and construct a coherent argument? And I always say to them, it's like having a big bucket of Duplo blocks, and you get to pick and choose the colors and the shapes, and you're going to construct it. But you have to have taught them what that construction looks like piece by piece, and how they know which blocks to choose and why.
So think about, as you're thinking about this, what, at whatever point in the semester it is, what can students do in terms of responding to each other's writing? What's reasonable to ask of them? Often they can do something very small and very targeted, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be useful. So again, break that down, break it into pieces. Do something that takes 10 minutes, not something that takes 50 minutes. And have them do that. If you do a full draft review, I recommend making it very, very structured. I recommend having them take the papers home to read and not try to do it all in class. So exchange drafts in one class, they take them home, they read them. Actually, I make my students write at least 2 comments per page and do a typed page at the end to the author. And then I give them a series of questions to discuss in class afterwards. So they've really read it and prepared. It's very structured, very directed in terms of what I have them do. And they do a pretty good job with that. You know, not great. Sometimes I'll listen to them and I'll go, oh my God, no, let's no. But not often. More often I'm hearing them say the things I've said in class. Little parrots, you know, repeating stuff we've said. So try it, but make it really, really structured and make sure they take the drafts home. Okay, so some stuff on that summative response, which I think is the bulk of the response that you're going to be giving for whole papers, right? First of all, I suggest that before, this is something kind of new to me that I'm going to try this semester. Reading the whole paper, taking some notes for yourself, some end notes, and then go back and put margin comments on. And here's why I think that's smart. If you're like me, my impulse is every time I see something I react to, I want to write a margin comment. Right? That takes tons of my time. And you know what? It doesn't benefit the students. They can only absorb so much. It's too much for them. So I've just been thinking about this over the summer. I think I'm going to try this, not allowing myself to mark on the paper at all. Figuring out, okay, what's really going on with this paper? Is the real issue here organization? Well, then I'm going to go back and put a couple comments per page, really focusing on organization. Is it development, thesis development? Well, then I'll go back and I'll respond to that. Because I have a really bad habit of just reacting to everything. So, yeah, so I'm going to try to make myself more disciplined on this. And I think that's going to save me time and be better for the students. Don't write more than 1 or 2 margin comments per page, but make them meaningful and substantive, not awk or ref or whatever cryptic.
Or I don't get this.
Yeah.
That's about them.
Although using I statements is good, respond as a leader, but be a little bit more detailed than that, right? I don't see how this piece of evidence fits in. Or I think this paragraph isn't holding together. Or I don't know what the topic sentence is here. But only 1 or 2 per page. That idea of marking it all up, all the research shows that does not benefit students. That does them no good. They can't absorb it. As you can imagine, right? And how would you feel? You mentioned about, you know, about that punitive idea. And how would you feel if you got a paper back and there was more, it felt like there was more writing from the teacher than you did it in the first place, if you worked hard on it. Now, if you didn't work hard on it, well, all right, your feelings get to be hurt then. But if you did work hard on it, that's really demoralizing. So don't be cryptic, you know, explain, briefly, of course. Don't edit or rewrite. Now, I'm not saying don't mark sentence level errors, but you're not an editor, you're a teacher, right? And you're not a rewriter, you're a teacher. I often highlight sentence level errors, little mark, and then they can come see me if they don't get it, and they do. So figure out how you're going to mark them, but don't edit it, don't rewrite it for them. Again, it's their paper, it's not yours.
Can I just challenge you around that? Because I learned the best or the most when a teacher would show me how to restructure a sentence to make it much clearer.
So here's what I would suggest, okay? What I'll often do is, first of all, I don't mark sentence levels in the whole paper. I choose a couple pages. If it's a long paper, I'll do even 4 or 5 pages. If it's a short paper, I'll do 2 or 3. Because they'll make the same errors usually throughout. Often what I'll do in that case is I'll take a paragraph and I'll say, no, and I'll do that. I'll take out clutter and I'll do some editing and I'll do some rewriting and then I'll write in the margin and say, note what I've done here to try to make this clearer. So instead of just doing it, right, I'm teaching them there. Instead of just doing it, I'm explaining to them why I'm doing it, and I'm only doing it on a paragraph.
Right, I only do it on like one
Yes,
sentence.
but I tell them what I'm doing. I say, so note what you can do here to make this clearer, or note what you can do to reduce the clutter here. So yes, absolutely, you can teach them through that, but in terms of coming to their grade, editing and rewriting are not the ways to come to the grade.
Right.
It can be a way to teach them.
That's okay, I think that's okay. All right, quick question, can you talk a little bit about editing on the paper itself or the piece of writing versus what you write on the rubric when you're actually assigning grade notes that you put?
Can you explain what you mean? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, so for example, and this might get back to sort of justifying the selections or the grades that you've made, but if you have 0 to 4 rubric for a particular line and you select 3 and not 4, do you put additional notes on the rubric around that?
I do. I think that, again, this depends on your time. I want to be realistic, especially those of you who are teaching gen ed courses and really big courses, right? I use, I'll show you real quickly. So one of the things I have for you here is the college writing program, or writing studies program. So we changed our name like a year ago, and I'm still using the old name because it's still in my brand. And it even says college writing program and rating rubric, which clearly I need to change. So this is our programmatic rubric. You can see that it's really detailed. One of the things I do when I give students their evaluated papers back is I highlight the sentences on there that I believe apply to their paper. That gives them a quick visual of why it justifies their grade, why they got the grade they got, but it also gives them information about it. It's not just, 3, right? But instead, this essay has a thesis, although it doesn't demonstrate ambition or take on a discernible degree of difficulty. And then there's more text after that. However, I also, because I'm teaching writing classes, I also have margin comments, and then I have something like this at the end, which is quite a bit, right? This first part comes from my assignment sheet. This is language from the assignment sheet. This is more discussion and explanation. So I'm giving them quite a bit of information on there. I have colleagues who will use this, and then they'll do an additional assignment-specific rubric that's similar to this, that has more language than just a number, and they do check boxes and highlight and all there. Or they'll just they'll leave themselves a little box, and they can only write enough to fill in that little box. That's another thing to do. So I think you do need to explain, but it doesn't always have to be pages and pages of explanation.
Now, all first-year students would have gotten this, right, going through the college writing program.
Yes, 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 absolutely. And we're probably going to be changing this. We've talked more and more about that this is really for a standard thesis-driven academic essay. I'd like to see us develop something that's a little more modular, so that if I'm assigning an annotated bibliography, there are boxes that I could pull together to develop a rubric for that. Some more of us are doing multimedia, multimodal and multimedia assignments. This doesn't fit that. So I'd like to see us, shake this up, but this will give you an idea of the kinds of things we do.
Yeah, that's a question. Two things I do, and I don't know if it's a good idea or whether it just seems mean, or I don't know. So on this question of like marginal comments, so I will make a correction. Let's say it's the punctuation, where the punctuation goes after a footnote or something like that, and I'll explain it goes here, and then I'll just write fixed throughout. And that's the last time I do that.
Right,
That's the last time I highlight that. I don't circle them later. Will the student be able to figure that out?
I just highlight them because it's easy.
No,
I
but I don't
highlight them.
highlight because I want them to go and find it. Because as an editor, then I feel like I would highlight them for them. But as a teacher, I want them to be able to figure it. As am I asking too much?
You know, I've been thinking a lot about that sort of question about the follow through on it. And one thing I'm thinking of trying for things like that are a little more mechanical is perhaps having them go back, fixing it, and then giving me the paper back. And I do points, so I could give them like another 5 points or whatever if they did it. I could check it in just a few minutes. You know, but I don't think it's unreasonable. I mean, I think that it should be, you know, I mean, it seems to me it shouldn't be. That is what should lead to student learning, right? Is showing them what the issue is, showing them how to fix it, and then giving them the opportunity to follow through. It seems like that's sort of the definition of learning. Now, that doesn't, but not all the students will do it. And that's the other part of this, isn't it? We can mark and mark and mark, and we can do it perfectly every time, and not every student is going to learn how to do it.
Then the second question, I don't put any marginal or grammatical or, you know, sort of, what, I don't know what you call it, you know, anything that's not real substantive about the content after page 2. And I just put a little line, I'll say no more grammatical
Yes, that's what I do.
corrections after this point.
That's what I do.
That's not me, that's not.
No, I read like the first 2 pages, and then I'll put a line at the end that stop sentence level marks here.
Okay. Oh, okay. And
Yeah, I never mark the whole paper.
Because otherwise I do it for days. Yeah.
That's right. And it's again, if they have a problem with commas on page 1, they have a problem with commas on page 2.
Exactly.
Why mark it every time?
Students don't like commas anymore.
They don't like this is almost irrelevant.
Semicolon.
Apostrophes.
I
That's
know,
the one
right.
that drives me nuts. You get an entire paper with 0 apostrophes in it. It's like, what, is your finger broken? Or it's like, what? Why is this happening here?
Especially with spell check.
Yes. Oh my God. I know. And I don't want to think about that because, right, you want to enter the fall thinking, all my students this semester will be brilliant. Okay. We are running short on time, and so what I'm going to do is, I said I'm going to post this on I was going to say Facebook. I'm going to post this on Blackboard for you. I've got some steps here that I came up with to help you set up a rubric. So let me just talk about those for a minute, and then I hope this is something that you'll be able to use. So there are different forms of rubrics, and we touched upon this a little bit already. You could have descriptive statements that are attached to ratings, whether that's a letter grade. I tend to use language from my assignment sheet, and then underneath I put excellent, very good, good, needs improvement, and I circle those or mark those underneath, and then I have more explanation later. Questions that you briefly answer, you know, just a line underneath. Yes, you did a great job on this. No, pay more attention to evidence, please, you know, in your revision or in the next paper. And then you can use boxes that are highlighted or checked. Any of those things will help keep you honest. They'll help keep you consistent. They will save you time. And if you do it well, they will give the students valuable information that they can use. The rubric language should do a few things. It should serve to kind of summarize any notes that you made on the paper. So you need to think ahead a little bit on it. But if things are coming out of your assignment sheet, your thinking should be more coherent anyways, in that case. They should tell the students why they got that grade, being realistic. They should give them some information for future improvement. In other words, not just punitive, but the kind of information that will direct them to improve their writing. And they should communicate your values and priorities. Again, if what really matters to you are commas, then make your rubric about commas. But if that's not, make it be about the stuff you really care about. Right? And again, I know this, we all get hung up on sentence level stuff, me in particular, and it matters. I don't ignore it. But I'm realizing more and more in reading research about writing that what matters the most is students' authentic investment in the writing, a desire to communicate clearly. The more they're motivated, the more that they are invested in their own argument and their own project, the more desire they're going to have to do it correctly. They are still going to make mistakes because they are students. And because they're human, too, because we do, too. Right? Yes. Yeah, I wish. All right, so I have some steps up here for things to help you develop a rubric for summative evaluation. So this kind of goes back to where we started with the assignment sheet. What do you want them to learn? And you can, by the way, you can put course content on your rubric too. You can say, has the writer communicated clearly about, I don't know, the history of the Civil War? That can be on your rubric. They don't have to be separate. Put them in order of priority, most important first. You'll see on mine, sentence level stuff and style is on there. It's on the bottom. It's not on the top. Then, once you've come up with no more than 4 or 5, develop a statement for each that would describe excellent work. There's your baseline. Right? This is what you're ideally looking for, and then you can work from there. Now, had we had time, which is fine because actually you guys all had really smart things to say, good things to say that we ran out. These are questions we're going to have you talk about in groups, but doing this on your own, this will help you figure out if this rubric's on the right track. All right. Yes, any quick questions? We're just about out of time.
Any thoughts on whether it's better to grade on the paper or online?
So I can tell you the research thoughts on it, whether it's to do it on the hard copy or online. There's research to indicate that students pay more attention when it's on paper than they do when it's online. And that's true for reading in general. I mean, just reading in general, students comprehend more and pay more attention to hard copy than they do to digital. Anecdotally, my experience is that students often react positively to comments on paper. On the other hand, there's stuff you can do digitally that is harder to do on paper. My handwriting is absolutely appalling. It's so terrible, and really one of the first things my students have to learn is how to look at my handwriting. It's that bad. I'm thinking this semester of trying digital comments, which I haven't done before.
And I do only digital. And what it really affords me is I find it's much quicker to grade, and I can give much more substantive comments right then and there, in the paragraph, in the bubble, and I do it actually as track changes. And my students I've used it in the FYS with 19, I've used it in the Gateway with 35, and the students have responded very well to it. And then they'll bring it to my office and their laptop or their iPad, and we'll go through it when they meet with me to review it. But I've not found it to be a barrier, and I have found that they have taken it seriously. And they have, I think what they've appreciated more than anything was the seriousness with which I took their writing.
That's the main thing. I think if you're giving good feedback, actually, it doesn't matter a lot. Where can you give the most effective feedback? Think of it that way. We'll
That's
do a
most
better job.
accessible to them too, so that they can
I
actually
do
read
more
it.
editing when I'm doing it digitally.
And that's a
your
trap.
problem.
I'm right. I've had that happen
You've got
with
to stop
colleagues.
that.
It takes them longer to do it digitally because they tend to write a lot more.
Yeah, don't be an editor.
Yeah, so you want to be disciplined. Yes.
So Rose, it sounds like you're doing it in a separate document, not
Yes.
on that.
Yeah,
And that's
I
how I do
saved
it
it.
too.
Yeah.
It just seems to take a long time.
You have
No.
to download, that's what
You
you
have
have
to
to download their
It
papers,
takes
save
2
it.
minutes, yeah,
Okay.
really. You
But I
download
don't
it, you
find
save
the
it.
tools when you're working on Blackboard, I find that very difficult.
Oh, I don't use it in Blackboard.
Okay, I just wanted to
No,
confirm
oh,
that you
God,
do it like I
They
do.
email it to me directly,
That's
and
what
then I just save it, and it doesn't take that, I mean, actually, it takes longer to print them out hard copy and run to the copier and pick them up. You know, you just open it, download it, save it, I put their initials on it, and I save it. And then I can track changes.
Because I have them
and grade it.
upload their paper to Blackboard,
Yeah.
just so I'm not getting 30 emails,
Yeah,
because
I
I'm
just
afraid I'll
do
miss
it as-
something.
Yeah.
But you can,
But
can't
then
you
until you
download it from Blackboard? Yeah,
Yeah.
I would do it in Word.
Time.
Yeah,
That's how I
that's
do
what I do.
You can also use Dropbox.
Yes,
Yeah.
right.
Sometimes
Some of my colleagues have started using Google Docs,
Yeah.
because then they can see what they can spy on the students while they're working. So there's that. Barbara had a comment, I think we'll
Well,
we'll
it's
end
the same, that I find that it's very time consuming to download everything, and then I have to keep track of it on my computer, but, I like to post them on Blackboard so students read each other's work as well. And do cross case.
Yeah, there are, I mean, you know, I just make a folder, right? And then as soon as I go through my inbox, I just put them right over in the folder and then save it to my desktop and, you know. And it also is good because then I keep them semester to semester, so if I have ever any questions about some essay that looks vaguely familiar to a previous one, I have them all there in a folder, you know, where I can go back if need be.
So let me tell you what we have for you here, it's a variety of lovely publications for you. This one is a really delightful little book out of Harvard University on responding to student writers. It's actually based on a lot of research of talking to students, interviewing students. This is a chapter of a book actually that I read this summer for my graduate class called The Elements of Teaching Writing, Resource for Instructors in All Disciplines. Great book. I've copied chapter 3, which is about responding to writing. It has a section actually about grammar and sentence level errors in it, so this is great. This is material that I use for feedback. There's the rubric, our rubric, and also a page of formative feedback and a page of summative feedback. This is the PowerPoint. Actually, most of you shouldn't need this. This is going to go up on Blackboard. And then this is from Rose from the first year seminar. Please come up and pick stuff up. I will post the PowerPoint up on Blackboard this afternoon so you have access to it. Thank you all for such a great session.